You have some reporting about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and how he made millions over the past year and a half. But before we get into how he amassed this fortune, I do want you to give us a backstory and talk about him as a person before we get into him as a candidate. So what can you tell
Yeah,
us?
sure. Yeah, sure. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the son of Bobby Kennedy, who was famously the Attorney General, who worked in the administration of his brother John F. Kennedy in the early 1960s, and then after the assassination of JFK in the late 60s, Bobby Kennedy was running for president himself when he himself was assassinated, and so RFK Jr. is one of his many children. And he's had a long career as an environmental lawyer, doing a lot of work on, suing companies that were involved in pollution and sort of working on behalf of people who are the victims of pollution, and has done sort of a number of other things, but has very much been a prominent member of a prominent family, and has definitely been, a Kennedy who was in the public eye, and has sort of carried forward the family's very famous, legacy of public service and being involved politically.
And now he's running for the nation's highest office as a Democrat, and he's seen as a fringe contender. So what can you tell us about RFK Jr., the candidate?
So he's running for president. His father ran for president. His uncle was president. His uncle Ted Kennedy was a senator for a long time. Who was seen as a presidential hopeful and did run at one point. He's definitely following in that long line of Kennedys running for the White House. But basically, he's a Democrat who is running against a Democrat who's in the White House, and it's not easy to challenge an incumbent and sort of come out ahead. And so he's polling, pretty well, but definitely is seen as sort of a long shot. And he's sort of gotten a lot of support, actually, from Republicans and from the right, who I think have seen him as, somebody who could maybe shake up Joe Biden and all of that. And so, he's kind of in an interesting position as a Democrat because he, is known for having sort of these vaccine skepticism and things like that, and certain policies that in some ways maybe make him more attractive to the right than the left. And so I think he's gotten a lot of support, maybe from there, and that's definitely part of why he's sort of seen as a fringe candidate, because he's even with the Kennedy name, is sort of it's a tough task to go up against an incumbent at all, and especially when you're sort of you have some political opinions that are pretty squarely opposed to some of the exact people who you're sort of hoping will vote for you.
But as you said earlier, he is a part of one of the most famous political families in our country's history. But you're reporting he made most of his money on his own within the past 18 months. So let's break down just exactly where that fortune's coming from. He's raking in most as an environmental lawyer. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, exactly. So, I was a little surprised he, filed his financial disclosure report that everybody running for president has to file. And it showed, that he has a number of family trusts, and a lot of them look like they're sort of, Kennedy family trusts. But he really didn't make a lot of his income, at least in the past year and a half or so, from those trusts, which is sort of interesting because you would expect him to be sort of making a lot of money, off just from, whatever these trusts pay out. But really, almost all of the money that he and his wife made, they sort of made themselves. And so I think the numbers came out something like he and his wife made at least $9 or $10 million going back to the very beginning of 2020, and almost all of it came from their own earnings. And so for RFK Jr., a big portion of that really is his work as an environmental lawyer, and he has his own firm named Kennedy and Madonna. And, he pulled in more than $5 million in income and, basically his share of the profit of that firm since 2022. And it's a 2-lawyer firm. It's him and one other guy, Madonna. And they basically do a bunch of environmental law. And they sort of litigate against, companies that pollute waterways and things like that. And so they maybe most famously were involved in the big class action lawsuit against DuPont that was the inspiration for the recent movie Dark Waters. So that's definitely the biggest share of his income. And then he also made a bunch of money sort of consulting for other law firms doing similar things, environmental things, and things like that. So he millions and millions of dollars basically just as a lawyer.
You did mention his wife a few times, his famous wife. Can you tell us a little bit more about her for those who don't know?
Yeah, so his wife is Cheryl Hines, who's a pretty famous actress. She most famously was Cheryl David in the HBO show Curb Your Enthusiasm. So she was the longtime wife of Larry David on the show, and basically she's a number of other roles. And since 2022, she was in a few movies, a few TV shows. The Flight Attendant on HBO. She did a few episodes on that, for example. And on their financial disclosure, she basically said that she made at least $1 million since 2022 from her film career, and it's sort of a loophole or so in the financial disclosure where, because she's his spouse, she only has to disclose that she made more than $1 million. She doesn't have to say how much more. So it's possible that they actually made more than $10 million since 2022, and all of that extra money that they would have made that maybe doesn't show up on the financial disclosure would have been money that they made themselves. It would just be money from her film career.